Hello, and welcome to this conversation on quality teaching in the context of diversity. I'm excited about this topic because I think it's at the heart of school reform in the 21st century. That the issue for us in teaching today is the issue of teaching across differences, connecting effectively with kids who bring multiple challenges, multiple differences, multiple opportunities, strengths, personality, race, ethnicity, culture, language, immigration background, gender, sexual orientation, kids that bring a wide variety and a rich mixture of diversity to our classrooms. But as we know, if we look at our data, not just in your school system, but across the country, when we look at our data in terms of outcome data and achievement data, we notice that diversity shows up again, and those kids who were not reaching, who are not being so successful in our classrooms, when we disaggregate that data, you know where that goes. It tends to point towards race, it points towards socioeconomics, it points towards language diversity, special needs, and underneath that are all the issues of learning style and difference and family background and health issues. So the interface of diversity with good teaching and with success in school is what we're talking about today. Now, much of the school reform movement and the rhetoric that we hear across the country is what I call blame the teacher or blame the educator kind of focus. That if we only had good teachers, we'd have better test scores and we could compare better to other countries in the world. I don't subscribe to that particular philosophy and that particular rhetoric. I have the opportunity to work with school systems all over the country, and I find amazing teachers committed, working their hearts out for kids and for kids' success. We know, on the other hand, that we have issues. We need to improve our practice. That's what this discussion is about today. How do we improve our practice? But we don't point to it from the point of view of what's wrong with educators. What I like to think about is what's good with us, what's best with us in terms of teaching across diversity in today's classrooms. Now, if we go back a few decades, when I think of my own elementary years and middle school, junior high years, and high school years, in the 1950s, early 60s, I grew up in a community, maybe like some of you, that was monocultural, where the kids that were in my classrooms with me, my colleagues and peers in school, were tended to be mostly white, mostly middle class, mostly Christian, mostly English speaking. The community I grew up in, people had lived there for long periods of time, so there was very little mobility. So teachers were basically teaching to a monocultural population. Now, this was not true for everybody even in the 1950s, but the data shows that many of us as teachers, since 90% of the teachers in the country are white, and there's no issue that white teachers can't teach across difference, but the issue is many of us grew up in settings that were not as diverse as the settings we're in now. So much of my writing and research across the decades has been about that topic. How do we prepare teachers who grew up like me to teach in settings that are very different in terms of the rich mix of diversity? And some of you had the opportunity to grow up in settings that were highly diverse, and you bring that background to teaching, which is wonderful as well. But today we're going to focus primarily on what I call successful practices, or creating those equity environments that work, where the things we do in our classrooms, in our schools, that we do alone, that we do with our colleagues and teams, that we do school-wide, the kind of things we do that make it more likely that some of the kids who have been traditionally on the fringes of success, in other words, they have not had access to success. They may have access to school, but not equitable access to success in school. So we're going to look at those things where we have been effective, where we have been able to reach out, build the relationships, create the environments, where our students who come with challenges, who come with diversity, I don't like to say they come with deficiency, because I think it's not about deficiency, it's about difference. All kids come with rich backgrounds in terms of their family, their culture, their language, their traditions. The connection issue is the one for us in schools. How do we connect how our kids are smart with how we do the business of schooling so that we can create more access to success for more kids? So I want everybody in the room for our first conversation here today to be thinking of a student who maybe is in one of those subgroups that in terms of your testing outcomes has been shown to be more challenging, where we're not being as successful reaching our kids in terms of the gaps, what we often call achievement gaps which I like to refer to more as opportunity gaps, or in terms of empowerment gaps. But some of those kids who, just think of a student in your classroom who you work with this year or maybe next year, but I'd like it to be as current as possible. A student for whom you've been able to make the kind of connections that opened the doorway for them to accessing that success. So think of a student, and I want you to think of the things you did in your interventions with that student that you felt were effective. When you saw the light come on, when you saw the doorway open, when you saw the turn in the corner, were greater success for that student in terms of school. Maybe this was around an achievement issue, maybe it was around a discipline issue, an attendance issue, but obviously some struggle and some lack of engagement with schooling for this child or this student. So what we're going to do is form groups of 3, and in those groups of 3, each person is going to share a story. The story will have 3 parts. The first part will be, what is the situation? What's the challenge? What evidence do we have that was not working for this child, this student? The second part is perhaps some of the interventions that you tried alone or as a team. The third part then is those things that seem to work and the evidence you saw that there was gain. Again, we're not talking perhaps about what we might call Cinderella stories, where the situation totally turned and there was massive change or huge gain. Often what happens in schools, from my own background as a teacher and yours, are more incremental changes. Sometimes we do have those large dramatic shifts, but today it's fine to talk about some of the small gradient shifts that we see in kids. So that's the third part of your story. So we're going to join in those groups, and if you don't have a story, if you're not really ready with a story yet, then invite the other members of your team to share their stories, and something will come to you as we go. Now that you've shared your stories in small groups, and I hope you enjoyed that process, I think this is something we need more of in public education, where teachers are actually sharing successful practices with each other. It isn't just a matter of bringing outside consultants and resources and experts, so-called, into your classroom, into your schools, but us sharing successful practices that are actually happening in our classrooms. What I'd like you to do from your stories now is just briefly check in with each other again in your small group. And I want you to clarify those keys to equity. Those were the behaviors in the most essential sense. What was the adult behavior that seemed to change the situation for the students? So get ready for that and have a spokesperson ready to feed that back, because you're going to chart that together, called the keys to equity. So take a few minutes and do that now. Now that you have this list of keys to equity, and I would suggest, by the way, that you type that up, word process it, distribute it to people throughout your school system, because these are the things that actually emerge in our